You asked me when I last lost my voice. It was some time ago, in the midst of some very strange events, which began one afternoon in my home. A friend and I were talking, and during the course of the conversation she confided that she'd been hearing voices in the middle of the night. But when she awoke, there was no one there. At times she had the uncanny feeling that it was she who was speaking, but in a voice not her own.
11.
I must admit, I didn't really know how to react to this, and so was relieved when a phone call interrupted the telling of this bizarre and quite disturbing tale. As I picked up the phone, the call was terminated, as often happens when not all payphones are working. So I wasn't particularly worried. I turned up the radio and forgot all about it. But it seems I forgot prematurely, because in the months that followed, these answerless calls kept returning. I began to wonder who was calling and where they were calling from.
There is no one call, but a calling, a call really, which is always a return, calling to silence.
My friend's story continued to haunt me, and I simply could not understand the meaning of this daily telephonic routine.
The call of the other is essentially anonymous.
I wondered which was most traumatic. Voices heard in the dead of night, or calls cut short in the fading light of the afternoon. Definitely, I concluded, my friend's experience was closer to madness. The voices she heard were so frighteningly foreign, whereas at least I knew that the telephonic dimension had an instrument in my home, and that I could pay my bills just down the street.
The call is from afar to afar. It reaches those who want to be brought back. It comes from me, and yet from beyond me and over me. It calls me to a place I have never been, a place so unfamiliar that I feel it as myself as I would be if I took myself off the hook. It calls me to disconnect.
Voices without bodies, calls without callers. I had the impression of a massive but anonymous switchboard, dialing in perhaps to check on my continued existence. At times I wondered if my telephone wasn't also an instrument put to excessive use by a mass of free-floating entities, able to vocalize but not materialize their ghostly presence. And this led me to listen very carefully to whatever occurred on the phone. With my ear pressed tight to the receiver, I became acutely aware of another world. A world populated by unexplainable sounds that endured even my dreams. At times, growing to recognize that space eclipsed by the dead tone of a hang-up, I experienced a kind of security. The static and buzzings developed a soft, muted feel, as if I was privy to an enclosure, a A vast electronic stadium which, as long as I held the receiver, held me off the hook. I would then be in a state of suspension, similar to that mixture of anxiety and pleasure felt when happening upon a crossed line. Do you make your presence known?
Because a gift and a burden.
Do you make your presence known?
In hearing, we are haunted by the other voices, lost, and calling from the other side.
Do you remain anonymous and eavesdrop?
You try to wipe away this fear. Slowly you speak to yourself over and over again. You say your name, but you are not called by your name. You are merely called, summoned to forget yourself.
Perhaps to find out what other people are saying.
This possible amnesia, which is so frightening, like forgetting the name of a very dear friend whose voice has called for an introduction. Fear borders every response. Will you forget yourself? Just as dread follows every non-response. Could it after all be only for you?
While waiting for unknown others to make a move, to notice my presence and call me into action, such questions would arise, often silencing the inscrutable sounds I so wanted to place. But then my ear would relax and unfold upon this vast milieu of voices, signals, whispered and untraceable conversations, whose audition demanded only that I remain silent and passive. I felt as if I'd stumbled upon another kind of home, and prayed for the first time in my life that my phone was bugged.
The voice of conscience is silent, not like the interior monologue which sweeps over and feels scattered in the wind-driven wallpaper itself. Too alien to be audible, it speaks, but only to call you to answer. It calls, but only because you could not call yourself. It comes like a surprise party line that you secretly anticipated but would not hear of. Like a voice so distant that you swear you are hearing things. The connection comes from without. But what is it? Electrical or vocal? And who makes it? You or... It's easier to swallow, less disturbingly uncanny when you say the operator.
Eventually I decided to put down the phone. Still, I felt that there must be a body behind the silence of this absent caller. And if there was a body, then there must be a space. And if there was a space, then I could do it somehow.
Armed with the telephone, they can cross vast distances and times. Eventually, they will call themselves gods. The price for this naming is death, because you cannot be in two places at once. And it is death at the hands, the mouth, and the ear of a live wire.
establishing a connection with this elusive networker would be difficult. But by this stage, my desire to finally elicit a response from the silent one on the end of the line was overwhelming. The driving factor was less curiosity than the developing realization that these calls were always interrupted, as much by my own non-response as the caller's silence. I was as implicated as the caller in the non-execution of these calls, guilty of not hearing whatever was there or not there to be heard.
The madman is clearly for one who can hear, who seeks God, since he cries out after God. Has a thinking man perhaps really cried out here to the profunds? And the ear of our thinking, does it still not hear the cry?
Had I been different, I would have been able to listen. I would have been truly called. As it was, I heard nothing, except perhaps a little of my own breath reflected from the chattering wall of telephonia.
What's the area code?
Yes, the Hong Kong number.
What number are you calling from?
And cabinet number.
I must find Edison today. He's the telephone man, isn't he? He has stuck telephones all over my house and one on the gate. They keep ringing all the time, day and night, so nobody can rest or sleep.
Okay.
We're all metal. Everything's metal in my
What number are you
house.
calling from?
I'm metal, and so is my son. And there's a gutter in the basement which has charges every one of us.
And you want to speak to Mr. Smith?
Began to hear voices speaking to him. Upon hearing a real voice through the telephone, he became violently insane and smashed the instrument to pieces. Subsequently, he claimed to have a telephone in his stomach, through which someone periodically talked.
C H E R Ether. Hello, Hong Kong. If I have an old number of
Cincinnati citizen insane. The victim had always been excessively nervous. The constant ringing of the telephone in his office finally drove him mad. His symptoms were peculiarly manifested. He rushes into drugstores, rings out the central, and calls for his departed sweetheart. Never considered the telephone to of the art of telephoning was a spiritualist who conjured ghosts and nightly seances in Salem, as he writes in his autobiography. I was now working with the occult force, electricity, and here was a possible chance to make some discoveries. I felt sure spirits could not scare an electrician, and they might be of use to him in his work. The early silence in the telephone circuit gave an opportunity for listening to stray electric currents that cannot easily be heard today. I used to spend hours in the night in the laboratory listening to the many strange noises in the telephone and speculating as to the cause. My theory at the time was that currents causing these sounds came from explosions on the sun, or that they were signals from another planet. They were mystic enough to suggest the latter explanation. But I never detected any regularity in them that might indicate they were intelligible signals.
Or you want to try the phone? Try your number there.
109.
Your name.
It's odd how things come your way. Strolling through a bookstore selling old and out-of-print books, a friend pointed me in the direction of a small hardback entitled The Wireless Telephone. Its pages brimmed with documentary evidence of a type of clairaudience known as voice boxing. Intrigued, I began to research this phenomenon and was eventually put in touch with a medium who agreed to be interviewed. Paul and I visited her one sultry afternoon.
It's an odd thing. When voices come through, you could liken it to a telephone. But I think that when one receives, it is similar to a telephone message, excepting one is seeing it often in vision or colours, and it's a puzzle. So there are lower levels that you don't particularly want to have out, because thought is form, and the other side.
Voices from the darker side, how do you prevent them from coming in?
Well, usually they hang around like attract light. And if you go into a state of meditation wanting to help the higher level, they will in fact come through you. If the person over the other side hangs around off in the place where the accident happened, it can be difficult for them. So there's a lot of work done by a lot of the Christian churches to do it, and that's a type of exorcism. It's a letting the person go over to their friends on the other side and letting them go. So those people you can usually tell because they're not lovely and peaceful and glowing. The high spirit is glowing, they're full of love and compassion, and you can feel that love and compassion flowing through you when you're speaking to them. There's nothing to be scared of with those. A lesser form, and I've only once encountered that, was such a horrible experience, and that was extremely unpleasant. You wouldn't do that. And it's all in the motive. Everything is in the motive that we do, because even though we mightn't do it, the fact that we consider doing it, we're halfway to doing it. They can communicate with thought, because thought is as tangible as words. Only when we're on the other side that we get out of this, and all the distortion caused by the things around us. As you think, so you are, is the old saying. Thoughts are formed on the other side.
overwhelmed not so much by the content of the interview, but by the amount of noise and static and radio signal that had permeated. I couldn't help sensing an insubstantiality to the voice, as if it were merely the auspices through which these signals and tappings could obtain a hearing. This event, it seemed, was both wireless and telephone, and its peculiarities demanded an additional confirmation. Ringing Denise the following day, I wanted to be sure I wasn't simply hearing things.
This is a telecom announcement. The number you have called is not available from this service.
You were asking about signals from radios and telephones and how, as a sensitive one, picked up these things. So they probably thought in there. I don't think mine are all that playful, but sometimes they have their little jokes, and maybe that they were just letting us all know that they were there.
This is a telecom announcement. The number you have called is not connected.
To answer the call, you must stop what you are doing, what you have been, and become what you are. As a thing which answers, an answering machine, you are automatically indebted for your very existence to the caller.
That I never get to answer. As if I'm not at home, when in fact you're not there. You're not at home.
The number you are calling is temporarily out of order.
By what strange logic you assume that the private call for your ears only does not come with a word into your home?
What was that? Simple click. Step. Regular. The letter S. And again. Marconi heard them for some time before he trusted himself to hand the telephone to Kent for corroboration. Could he hear anything? Yes, he could. Then the face sound is significant.
The 008 number you have called is not available to callers in your...
What kind of listening hears only the background, only the ambience of making a connection?
They as a kind of common third term.
The number you have called is not available from...
I don't think mine are all that playful, but sometimes they have their little jokes, and maybe that they were just letting us all know that they were there. Really, these phone calls. Sometimes I feel like I'm just ringing myself.
A bell was made to ring. An unseen pulse of energy leapt across the young Marconi grotto and made a bell ring.
A bell. Not a peal of victory bells that might more fittingly have marked such a triumph. Not the deep
Hello?
note of a bell.
Are you there?
Awaken and listen, you solitary ones. Winds are coming from the future with mysteriously beating wings, and good news is reaching sensitive ears.